Welcome to the Exponential Edge podcast with your host, Arya Sulur. I'm excited to have you join me on this journey exploring the forefront of technological advancements and innovation that will shape our future. As a rising junior at Acton Boxborough Regional High School and the CEO of SecArmor, a cybersecurity startup, I've always been fascinated by the transformative power of technology. In this podcast, we will dive deep into 5 key areas that are poised for exponential growth in the next decade. We'll be exploring the realms of cybersecurity, generative AI, sustainability and climate tech, biotech and human longevity, as well as the reshoring of manufacturing. These topics hold immense potential to revolutionize our world and redefine the way we live, work, and interact. Each episode will feature insightful conversations with experts, thought leaders, and visionaries who are at the forefront of these fields. In just 30 minutes, our goal is to provide you with 5 signature nuggets of wisdom from our guests. These key takeaways will empower you with knowledge and help you stay ahead in an ever-evolving technological landscape. Without further ado, let's introduce our guest for this week. Hello everyone, our guest today is John Cobb, CEO of Ayla Networks. Hi John, could you please give us a brief introduction to your career thus far?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Arya. So I've been in connectivity all my life really. I did a year out after high school before going to university, which, by the way, I thoroughly recommend. And worked for IBM. And as part of that, I got to work at Wimbledon at the tennis championships.
Wow.
Setting up the network, supporting all the...
Which year was that?
Oh, wow. Now you're asking. It would have been 93 and 94 worked at Wimbledon. And so I got to see Steffi Graf and Ivan Lendl and Andre Agassi. And it was awesome, right? But what we were doing is we were really learning about things like fiber, like laying fiber on site. And we were learning about Wi-Fi. So as part of that, when I wasn't watching the tennis, I got to demo one of the first Wi-Fi cards in a laptop. And I was demoing this to a whole bunch of, IBM customers, and no one could believe it. I was walking around with a laptop saying, look at this, you're connected, you can see all the scores, you can see the video. And so that got me really interested in connectivity, frankly. It's probably hard to believe now, but email was pretty new. You didn't use email for business. IBM had this internal communication system, and we still wrote letters to our customers. It's not that long ago. But now saying that makes me feel old. So anyway, from there, that got me interested, moved to the US, and in the kind of the early 2000s, late 90s, worked with some of the big telcos who were rolling out broadband all over the country. And it was really obvious they were going to have a massive problem, and that was they were putting millions and millions of devices in people's homes, and they had no way to manage those devices, to control the software on them. And so we built a bunch of software to do that, to let them remotely control the devices that go into people's homes, push firmware updates, make modifications, and all of that. And then for me, frankly, IoT was a natural evolution of that. Because IoT is just the next set of devices being connected, and you have the same problem. If you're a large manufacturer of device, think about Amazon with all their device assistants, right? They have to be able to change the software and update it and get data back, and so there's all these systems in the background that are doing that all the time. And so if you're on a Comcast or an AT&T, or you're in Europe on British Telecom, these guys all have platforms in place that are monitoring and managing your connection all of the time. And IoT is just the next evolution of that. If you have if your clothing is connected and measuring your heart rate, that still needs to be managed remotely. So that's what IoT is. So for me, it was a really natural evolution. But my big takeaway from all this is take a year out. It's really good fun.
Yeah, if your parents allow it.
Yeah. Well, mine kind of had to. So I said, well, I've got a job. And they were like, okay, go do your job and then go to college. So
how did you get from the broadband days to where you are now, Ayla Networks? How
Yeah.
did
So,
yeah.
sorry, go on.
No, go on. That's
Yeah,
all.
yeah, no, it was really straightforward because what happened was I worked for a company called Two Wire, which is a great company run by Pat Romano, who now runs ChargePoint, which does all the charging power platforms for electric cars.
Yeah.
But from there, we got bought by a company called Aris, and at that point, I said, I need a break from working 80-hour weeks, so I took a year off. And one of the companies we bought at this company called Pace, one of their board members came to me and said, "Hey, you're really into this connectivity stuff, and we've invested in this company called Ayla Networks. It's really about connectivity at the end of the day, managing millions of devices out in the field." And they said, "Are you interested in getting involved?" And I said, "Yeah, that makes perfect sense." So, second time in my life, I took a year off,
Yeah.
which again was great, by the way, and then joined Ayla 6 years ago.
Nice. So you were talking about the early 2000s, mid 2000s with broadband and how about 300 million internet connected computers were around back then into the 2000s. And then going to the 2010s, there was about 3 billion. Now there's 300 billion. Uh, what factors do you think drove this growth? Where's it heading?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the factors I think are easy to see. The way that I would think about it is the evolution has happened because compute, basically in general, compute has moved from, if you really go back, you think compute used to be mainframes, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be, big machines, then it was PCs, and then it was phones. Although, phone is really a misnomer for what we're talking about, right? It's really small devices. So really big devices, mainframes, to smaller devices, PCs, to much smaller devices, what we call phones, to really, really, really small devices like sensors and IoT devices and things you wear on your wrist and those. So that's the evolution, right? It's not so much in my mind the evolution of connectivity; it's the evolution of compute that we're seeing, right? And that's going to continue, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this. But fundamentally, we think nothing now of having a computer on our wrist. I've got a Fitbit on. That is more powerful than the early space shuttles, right? And how has that happened? And that's happened for several reasons, right? The first is price of connectivity chips. So you look at Moore's law, or you look at just chips getting more and more, smaller, faster, you get more for less. It is massive manufacturing capability. So think about the iPhones in China, right? They get manufactured in China. Why? Because companies in China can bring 10,000 people to a factory or a set of factories and basically create a town, and 100,000 people and manufacture iPhones, right? There's a huge manufacturing base behind this to drive this, and then ultimately, I suppose, price of connectivity has come down. So you look at the telcos and the cable guys, the satellite guys. You look at what Elon Musk is doing, and now everyone has access to connectivity, and it's not really, really, really expensive, right? You don't have to have your special lines. You don't have to have very special kit to get connected. So all of that means you can put connectivity in smaller devices. You can manufacture billions of them. You can afford to do that. And then finally, there's a drive of utility. So, for your generation, right, you can't imagine not being able to, go on your app and say, okay, I need to go from A to B. I'm going to get an Uber. That's a really cool, it's a really cool feature. It's a really good, it's a good reason to have a connected device in your pocket. For my generation, now we're so used to the fact that I've got something measuring my heart rate when I sleep. I've got something telling me, you need to get up and move and walk. I've got something looking at my fitness, right? And all of that data and all of that utility then drives drives consumers ultimately to purchase, and all of that data drives business to purchase these types of sensors and devices. So all of this coming together is what's driven this explosion. And look, compute, we know compute is going to get cheaper. It just always does. Connectivity is going to get cheaper. It always is. And then really smart people, your generation, much more than my generation now, are going to come up with really cool ways to put all of that together, right? Whether it's in your clothing or, something you swallow or, heaven forbid, connected toilet that measures what comes out the other end. I mean, all of that is coming.
Yeah. And I think about 5 billion people have access to smartphones now.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is. Out of what, 8 billion people in the world?
Yeah.
5 billion. Yeah. And with that proliferation of IoT devices, not just smartphones, but even refrigerators now are getting connected to the internet. Like cars, you get in a car, there's a big screen where the dashboard should be.
I love this, right? I mean, take cars as an example, right? I think refrigerators is a terrible example, and people always use it with me, and I'm like, look, I get it, and I love technology, or I wouldn't be here, but why connect your fridge, right? And look, there are use cases, right? You have water filters that need changing. Ideally, you could eventually see, okay, this is what's in my fridge, this is what's going on, this is what I need to reorder. But compare that to cars, right? So think about, as a thought experiment, think about this, right? If you have autonomous vehicles that don't need a driver, right? Which it's just a computing problem. I mean, it's a complicated one. There's a vision problem, but you have cars that don't need a computer, then you don't need to own a car. Think about it, right? Why own a car? Instead, sign up for a car service. And you say, hey, I want to go from here to here, right? Car comes and picks you up, it takes you there and drops you off, right? You don't need to put that capital into buying the car. And then the car goes on and does the next, right? So these cars get much, much, much more utility, because 90-something% of the time your car is parked. It's just taking up space. And so if you do that, then you don't need parking lots, right? It completely changes how you shop, how you work. It changes how you do city layout. You can make entire areas pedestrian. You can massively reduce traffic fatalities. You can control traffic much more efficiently. There's so many kind of knock-on benefits, but to do that, you have to have all these cars connected. They have to be able to understand kind of what's going on with the traffic. They have to be able to talk to each other, and they have to be able to handle all these road conditions. But that's all coming, and that's a really good example of chips are getting cheaper, technology is getting better, connectivity is getting cheaper. It's going to happen it'll happen in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think it's a great example of cars.
Mm-hmm. So moving forward, companies like Amazon, Apple, Google, all influential players in the IoT space, right? So how does Ayla Networks position itself in relation to these tech giants? What makes it special?
Yeah, it's a really complicated relationship we have with these guys, right? And ultimately, it's competition with most of them. So, take AWS as an example. So we obviously we use compute and storage from AWS. So we use a lot of their servers. But they have IoT offerings that don't do exactly what we do, but certainly overlap with what we do. You then look at, so that makes for a complicated relationship. The way that I would describe it, they may describe it differently, is they give you a set of tools, whereas we're giving you a finished product. So if you're a manufacturer, let's just say you're a 100-year-old company that's been making locks, and you say, okay, we now want to make connected locks. We can do all of the work that takes them from a non-connected lock to a connected lock. Whereas if they went with an AWS or a Microsoft, they would have to hire an engineering team, spin up cloud instances, build all of that software themselves. So that's fundamentally how we differentiate. But the relationship is a complicated one, and they want to control the home, they want to control consumer data, and so that also puts them at odds with a lot of our customers. That 100-year-old lock company says, well, I want to have a relationship with my customer. I don't want it to be all through some voice assistant where all that data goes back to Amazon or all that data goes back to to Apple or Google. And so it's a really, really complex environment, and one that we're all navigating all of the time. But we have to support all the voice assistants. We have to support any of the standards. We have to work with Apple devices, because we're a smaller player in this, and we can't afford not to do that. And frankly, that's what our customers want. They don't want to be limited to, well, only people that are kind of Apple households can buy my devices, or only people that are Android households can buy my devices. So we have to support everyone.
Like a few years ago, it was like that Apple ecosystem. You couldn't really use any Amazon or Google products, but now everything's intertwined.
It is, and we're getting, there are standards that are trying to bring all of that together, but it's going to take a long time for those standards to mature, I think, where they're really valuable. The problem in general with standards is they can end up being a lowest common denominator. So supporting the standard often doesn't give you, what you need to have a successful product. And I think, we have the Matter standard in IoT now, which is fairly new. And give it time, I've got hope for it, but I think it's years away. And in the meantime, the big guys, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, are going to try and get control of the home, or keep control of the home, and importantly, keep control of consumer data. That's really what they're after.
Definitely. And speaking of the consumer data, when it comes to security and in the context of deglobalization, how is Ayla Networks ensuring its platform's integrity? And additionally, with the rise of quantum computing, how is Ayla preparing to maintain platform security and resilience?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we spend a lot of time on security. So there's lots of ways that you build security into your product. The way that everyone sees is you do regular penetration testing, and so we do. We have programs in place where we're doing constant penetration testing. Then you have a kind of a defense in depth strategy, which basically says if someone gets through the outer layer, how do you minimize the damage they can do? So basically that means every single account on the system or every single service only has the ability to do exactly what it needs to do and nothing more. And then our customers do penetration testing. You have tools that all the code runs through to make sure we're not creating vulnerabilities. So there's this really kind of engaged focus on security. Privacy is the next part of this, which is you have to design the platform to make sure, again, that you only keep the data that you absolutely need for the time you absolutely need it. You don't send data over borders where you shouldn't be doing that. For example, we have an instance in China, an instance in Europe, and an instance in the US. Because of the different data export laws in those regions. So we're not taking European data into the US, we're not taking US data into Europe, etc. Same with China. I think the really interesting question, and we're starting to see more of this now, but I think the next kind of 3, 4, 5 years, as kind of the governments of China and the US in particular, and to an extent Europe, seem to be getting further apart. National security concerns are really becoming front and center. So think about if you've got a Chinese IoT platform that is controlling devices in people's homes, and especially when you get to real scale, think about what that gives you. So one of the things you can do with a platform, an IoT platform, is you can push software changes to these devices. So you have all these little computers in people's homes. Some of them have microphones on them. Some of them have cameras on them. Some of them are your door locks. Some of them are telling you about your baby's health. Right? And if all that data, all those devices are controllable, and all that data is usable by ultimately the Chinese government, that at scale becomes a national security risk. And so we're starting to see Congress say, hang on a sec, do we really want all these devices in people's homes that may be secure, but are ultimately, the Chinese government has access to? and it's starting to get some traction in Congress. So I think that'll be an interesting change over the next kind of 3 to 5 years.
Definitely. Like in the early 2000s again, with those 300 million devices, most of them were computers, maybe early smartphones. And those are the only things that were really connected to the internet and that could be hackable. But now everything is hackable. There's so many more ways that you could fall into a security risk.
Right, and the scary thing is that if you have a poor device on your home network that gets hacked, that may give access to the rest of your home network, and depending on how that's set up. So, hackers are really good at finding the weak part of your network.
Mm-hmm.
And for most of us, someone getting into our home network is not that worrying. But if they start to be able to get into, your laptops or your phones, that becomes a real issue, because then you're talking, financial data, identity theft, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. All right. So given that Ayla Networks supports both consumer and commercial products, could you shed some light on the differences and similarities in developing IoT solutions for these two segments?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in general, the differences aren't huge. Fundamentally, in the consumer space, you're trying to create utility for a consumer. So that's usually something to do with comfort or security or, ease of use, right? Think about connected thermostats or HVAC systems. I want to be able to control the temperature in my house from bed, or, I've left and gone on holiday. I want to make that change now. I forgot to, turn off the AC. That's kind of a convenience feature. And if you look at the IoT products that are successful, most of them are based around kind of convenience, comfort, and security. In the commercial space, it tends to be around saving money and improving customer service. So take that same product take that same HVAC system or thermostat in a business, and what do they care about? They care about, well, how do I manage that so that I am only cooling the building when I need to be cooling, so that I'm spending less money on my electricity bill, as one example. Or if you're the manufacturer of that HVAC, you want to know, okay, hang on, this device is going to fail. It's running into problems. I want to proactively go out and do maintenance on it so that I'm not letting that fail. I want to improve my customer satisfaction, which ultimately will lead to more sales for me. So all the technology is the same. Just how it is used tends to be different.
Yep. Yeah. And talking about the future, digital twins. There's been a lot of talk about digital twins for machines and systems. I've actually done a little bit of digital twin work myself with an internship, but I can't really get into too much of that until it's released. But looking ahead, how feasible is the concept of a digital twin for humans? And could you also just give a little brief description for people who may not know what a digital twin is?
Yeah, sure. So I love the idea. The idea of a digital twin is it is a representation of the physical world on a computer, fundamentally digitally. And that representation of the physical world can be really simple. It can be a representation of a light. So is it on? Is it off? What color is it? What is its brightness setting? And you could imagine if you had that information, you could, in the digital, on the computer, in an app, you could say, hey, I know exactly what's going on with this light, and it could exactly replicate it. As you get into bigger devices, that gets more complex. As you get into systems, that gets really complicated. Think about a digital twin of, the roads in San Jose, right? Kind of what's going on, what cars, what speed, what potholes, what's closed, what accident, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could see that would be a really complicated, constantly updating digital twin to build. And then to your next question, digital twin for humans, I think then gets even more interesting and complicated. I personally love the idea, right? As as compute, as the cost of compute comes down, as connectivity becomes ubiquitous, and trust me, I mean, my kids are a little younger than you, and they have no concept of not having connected devices.
Yeah.
And I think, I think this will only, certainly in the West, in the next kind of 10, 20 years, everything will be connected all of the time. It'll be so cheap. It'll be like having running drinking water, right? You don't even think about it. And so then to me, it's really interesting. Well, and I joked about, the connected toilet, right? But if you think about, if you can measure people's health data, and if you can effectively measure what they're eating, because we can measure heart rate and things like skin temperature, there's contact lenses that can tell you about blood sugar level. But if you can start to measure what's going into the body, what the body is doing, and what's coming out of the body, I think you can get some really, really interesting insights on people's health in terms of recommendations of, hey, you should be eating this. You're low on protein, you need more carbs, you need more fiber. I think there's stuff like that we're really, really, really close to. Like I said, I wear a Fitbit and have done for years and years and years and years. And it's interesting, when I got COVID a few years ago, I went back and looked at the data, and you could absolutely see, like probably 2 days before I knew I had it, my resting heart rate just spiked. And it's a really blunt instrument for detecting something like that. But as you get more instrumented on the body, around the body, in clothing, I think measuring what's going into the body is really hard. I think that's a challenge that we still have, but I think some smart people will figure it out. I think you better tell a lot about people. And then if you think about all that data at a macro level over time, and then I have to say the word AI, and then think about using that to train a model, where you can get such good insight into health data. Because our bodies, our systems are so complicated. We don't get a lot of good analytics about, hey, if you do this for 20 years, this is going to be the impact on you, right? We're really, really bad at that. But if you get kind of that type of volume of data, can look at it over time, and we have the technology from generative AI now to actually process that data, which we didn't used to have. I think the future in terms of health, living longer, more healthily, I think the opportunity is huge, and is happening, because the value there is huge.
Definitely, yeah.
And then you get really interesting things like, not to talk politics, but can you then turn the US healthcare system on its head? So you're not always, you're not paying a huge amount of insurance to fix a problem, but instead actually managing people's health. It would be fascinating, and I think so important, so beneficial for society. And we're not that far away from it.
Mm. Yeah, it's really exciting, definitely, because there's so many different things you could do with digital twins.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go a little bit, shifting gears, to your background in Cambridge University. Just a second. Sorry.
No worries.
Sorry about that. I wanted to go into your background with Cambridge University, and how do you think academia is shifting towards these new topics of IoT, where the world is going? Are there any classes, are there any subjects that are commonplace in college now?
Yeah, look, I mean, IoT at the end of the day is about the data. So if I was going to college now, I mean, I did a CS degree. If I was going to college now, I would focus on AI. I mean, no matter how you skin it, AI is the next revolution that we are going through, right? From not having computers to computing, to the internet, to badly named mobile phones, to these small computers in our pockets, to AI. I absolutely believe that. So if I was going through college now, I would make sure I was understanding AI, and I don't mean the deep science. There'll be a small percentage of people, I think, that really move the science forward, but I think leveraging and using AI. When my generation learned how to program, I think your generation will learn how to leverage AI to get the best results.
Yeah.
So I would definitely focus there. Look, I don't know where the universities are today. I mean, they tend to be kind of 10 plus years ahead of what is out, in the industry. I think they'll carry on taking, connectivity standards forward. And I think there'll be a small group of people that do that. But, I think every company let me put it like this. I think there'll be two classes of company over the next kind of 20, 30 years. And that is companies that leverage AI and companies that don't. And the ones that do will win, and the ones that don't will, I think, really, really struggle. So I'm certainly telling my kids, I don't really mind what degree you do, but make sure you understand,
Yeah.
Make sure you understand AI.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And to end it off, I just wanted to ask, what's your favorite application of IoT? From like the simplicity of smart bulbs to the complexity of industrial IoT. What's your favorite?
So I've got two answers to that, and they're probably a little boring, and I apologize for that. But the first one is one of the guys we work with is a company called Ayla, who I think are just awesome, and they do a connected baby sock that measures blood oxygen level and heart rate, and tells the parents if the baby is getting into trouble in the crib. And I just think, my kids are obviously older than that now, but one of the things you just so worry about as a new parent, you put your baby down and you hear about all of these, sudden infant death syndrome, and you worry about it. And that technology didn't exist when my kids were babies, right? But it's such a great use case, right? How can you not love keep more babies alive, right? As a use case. And there's a whole bunch of great data they get and sleeping patterns and those sorts of things. So that in terms of what's out there right now, I love that use case. I think it's brilliant. I think they're a great company. The second one that I love, and again, you're going to be really bored by this, but is my Fitbit. And the reason is, at the end of the day, technology for the sake of technology is worthless, right? Apart from us geeks who quite enjoy it. And the thing I like about the Fitbit, and obviously the Apple Watch, and there's lots of competitors out there, but the thing I like about it is it has driven change in my behavior and created good habits. And one of the things, look, one of my views on life is you have good habits and bad habits, and those define how you live your life. And Fitbit has driven a set of good habits for me because I now have the data about how many steps do I take, how long do I sit behind my desk without moving. I've changed that. I make sure I get up and walk. I do conference calls while walking, which is just better for me. Because it gives me data on my sleep, I now have a target for how much I sleep, which means rather than watching, that next episode of, some binge-worthy show on Netflix, I actually go to bed, right? Rather than doing that one more email, I say, okay, I'll do it in the morning. And that is, I think both of those, and again, they're small data points, but I think they've just made my life better. I think they've done that for a lot of people. And so for both of those reasons, for both of those products, I think you have an obvious, amazing use case for the baby sock. And in Fitbit, I think it's just, it's actually, it has changed my life. So those are my favorite two today. The thing that I struggle with, is I want to have kind of better control of my diet, and it's probably common to a lot of people around the world. And there's no good way to do that yet. There's an app that you can get called MyFitnessPal where you can put in everything that you eat, and it makes it as easy as possible. But it's just a lot of work still. So if someone could solve that problem, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you for that.
No worries.
And finally, could you just end us off with your 5 key takeaways from this conversation? What are the 5 most important things we talked about?
My first one is take a year off. It's if you get the opportunity, it's worth it. Look, IoT is going to continue to evolve. Sensors are going to get smaller. Your clothes are going to have sensors in. Everything is going to end up being connected. but know that these big companies and small companies alike, they are in a massive battle now to control the home and to control your data. So be aware, right? In this world, and I'm sure you've heard this before, kind of, you the individual are the product, right? They are trying to get your data and be the platform that all your data flows through. So just be aware of that and make choices with that in mind. Think about who you're giving your data to, because over the next 10 years, you'll be able to instrument everything, right? Talk about digital twin for humans. So I'd say think about that. Geopolitical risk and national security is going to drive a big change. You talked about deglobalization. I think necessarily Europe and the US are going to move away from China. I think that's going to have really interesting knock-on effects. I think a lot of these cheap connected devices you can buy on Amazon today, I think you're going to struggle to get them because of these national security risks. But again, think about your data, think about who you're buying these products from, think about where the data is going. And then I would say learn AI. It's what I would have said probably 20 or 20 years ago. Learn about connectivity, learn about the internet. Right now, it's learn AI. I just think it's going to be so important. Those are probably my big takeaways.
All right. Thank you for that. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the Exponential Edge podcast. And join us next week as we delve into topics that will see exponential adoption in the future. Thanks, John.
Thanks, all right. Cheers.
All right.